Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about some of the most disgusting child abductors that got sentenced to life in prison. These are the monsters who preyed on innocent children and who showed no remorse for their heinous crimes. They are the worst of the worst, and they deserve to rot behind bars for the rest of their lives. Let's take a look at their twisted minds and how they got caught and punished. Are you ready? Let's begin. Stuart Campbell. Our first case involves the tragic story of Danielle Jones, a 15-year-old girl who vanished on her way to school in Essex, England, in 2001. She was last seen getting into a blue Ford Transit van, driven by her uncle, Stuart Campbell. Campbell was a 44-year-old builder who had a history of sexual offenses, including indecent assault and rape. He also had an unhealthy obsession with his niece, and he had secretly taken photos of her and kept them in his van. He had also sent her text messages, pretending to be a boy who liked her. When the police searched his van, they found traces of Danielle's blood and DNA, as well as a stun gun, a knife, and a rope. They also found a diary, where Campbell had written about his fantasies of kidnapping and killing Danielle. Campbell denied any involvement in Danielle's disappearance, and he claimed that he had dropped her off at a bus stop. He also tried to blame his brother, Danielle's father, for the crime. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was arrested and charged with murder. During the trial, the jury heard shocking details of Campbell's depraved mind and how he had planned and executed his niece's abduction. They also heard heartbreaking testimonies from Danielle's parents, who pleaded with Campbell to reveal where he had hidden Danielle's body. Campbell remained silent and showed no emotion or remorse. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 20 years. He is still in jail, and he has never revealed what he did with Danielle's body. Danielle's parents have never given up hope of finding their daughter, and they have campaigned for changes in the law to make it easier to convict murderers who dispose of their victims' bodies. They have also set up a charity called Missing Abroad to help families of missing people overseas. Michael Webb. Our next case is the terrifying story of an 8-year-old girl who was abducted in broad daylight in Fort Worth, Texas in 2019. She was walking with her mother on a Saturday evening when a man grabbed her and threw her into his car. The mother tried to fight back and screamed for help, but the man drove away with the girl. The abduction was captured on surveillance cameras, and the police issued an Amber Alert, asking the public to look out for a gray Ford sedan. The car belonged to Michael Webb, a 51-year-old registered sex offender who had a history of drug abuse and violence. He had previously been arrested for sexual assault, but the charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. He had also been stopped by the police earlier that day, but he was let go because they did not know he had the girl in his car. Webb drove to a hotel, where he held the girl captive in his room. He sexually assaulted her and threatened to kill her if she tried to escape. He also told her that he had killed her mother and that he was going to kill her too. Meanwhile, the police received a tip from a hotel clerk who had seen Webb's car in the parking lot. They surrounded the hotel and searched every room until they found Webb and the girl. They rescued the girl successfully and arrested Webb. Webb admitted to the abduction and the assault, and he pleaded guilty to kidnapping. He also faced federal charges of kidnapping and sexual exploitation of a child. During the trial, the jury heard harrowing evidence of Webb's brutal and brazen crime, and how he had traumatized the girl and her family. They also heard the impact statements from the girl and her mother, who described how they had suffered physically and emotionally. They also thanked the police and the public for saving the girl's life. Webb was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently in a federal prison, and he will never see the light of day again. Trevor Summers. Now let's dive into the horrifying story of Trevor Summers, a 39-year-old man who kidnapped and assaulted his ex-wife, Alyssa Mathewson, in Tampa, Florida, in 2017. Summers had a history of domestic violence, and he had been arrested several times for abusing Mathewson. He had also been ordered to stay away from her and to wear a GPS ankle monitor. However, he cut off the monitor and tracked down Mathewson, who had moved to a new apartment with their 3 children. He waited for her outside her apartment, and when she came home, he attacked her with a knife. He stabbed her in the chest and forced her into his car. He then drove around for hours while he continued to assault her. He also called his 14-year-old daughter Tyra and told her that he had killed her mother and that he was going to kill himself. Tyra was terrified, and she called the police, who traced the call and located Summers and Mathewson. They surrounded the car and negotiated with Summers, who eventually surrendered. They rescued Mathewson, who was severely injured and rushed her to the hospital. She survived, but she had to undergo several surgeries, and she suffered permanent nerve damage. Summers was arrested and charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, and violation of a domestic violence injunction. Summers was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison plus 15 years. The judge called him a monster and said he deserved the maximum punishment. Tyra testified at the sentencing, and she said she hated Summers and that he had ruined her life. She also said she was proud of her mother and that she hoped to move on with her life. Anthony Rodriguez. Next up, we have Anthony Rodriguez, a 32-year-old man who raped and kidnapped a 14-year-old girl in Lompoc, California, in 2016. Rodriguez was a convicted sex offender who had previously served time for molesting a 10-year-old girl in 2008. He had also been arrested for burglary, assault, and drug possession. He was living in a halfway house, and one day, he went on a crime spree. He broke into several homes and stole money, jewelry, and guns. He also kidnapped a 14-year-old girl who was walking home from school. He forced her into his car and drove her to a remote location. He then raped her and held her at gunpoint. He then drove her back to town and dropped her off near a park. He told her not to tell anyone, or he would kill her and her family. The girl ran to a nearby store and called the police, who launched a massive manhunt for Rodriguez. They found him hiding in a motel and arrested him. Rodriguez was charged with forcible rape, kidnapping, burglary, and possession of a firearm by a felon. Rodriguez pleaded not guilty, and he claimed that he had consensual sex with the girl and that he did not kidnap her. He also appealed his case and argued that he had ineffective counsel and that the evidence was insufficient. However, his appeal was denied, and the court upheld his conviction. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison, plus 25 years. He is currently in state prison, and he will never be eligible for parole. Jake Patterson. The next one is the nightmare story of Jake Patterson, a 21-year-old man who killed a couple and kidnapped their 13-year-old daughter, Jamie Kloss, in Barron, Wisconsin, in 2018. Patterson had seen Jamie getting on a school bus, and he decided to abduct her. He drove to her home, armed with a shotgun, and broke down the door. He shot and killed Jamie's father, James, who tried to protect his family. He then found Jamie and her mother, Denise, hiding in the bathroom. He shot and killed Denise and dragged Jamie out of the house. He put her in the trunk of his car and drove away. He took her to his cabin about 70 miles away where he held her captive for 88 days. He sexually assaulted her and beat her. Meanwhile, the police and the public launched a massive search for Jamie and offered a $50,000 reward for any information. They followed thousands of leads and interviewed hundreds of people, but they had no clue where Jamie was or who had taken her. Patterson had taken precautions to avoid detection, and he had no connection to Jamie or her family. He was a complete stranger who had acted on a random impulse. However, his plan was foiled by Jamie herself, who managed to escape from his cabin when he was away. She ran to a nearby road where she was found by a woman walking her dog. The woman recognized Jamie from the news, and she took her to a neighbor's house, where they called the police. Jamie was rescued and reunited with her family. She gave the police a detailed description of Patterson and his car, and they arrested him shortly after. Patterson confessed to the murders and the kidnapping, and he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide and 1 count of kidnapping. During the trial, the court heard shocking details of Patterson's crimes and how he had planned and executed them. They also heard the impact statements from Jamie and her family, who described how they had suffered and grieved. Patterson showed no remorse, and he said he did not care what happened to him. He also said he loved Jamie and that he regretted what he did. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 40 years. And that's it for today's video about the monsters who preyed on innocent children. We want to acknowledge the importance of justice and accountability, and the role of the police and the public in bringing these criminals to justice. We hope that these stories will raise awareness and prevent future tragedies. How do you feel about the sentences that these abductors received? Do you think they are fair, or too lenient, or too harsh? Keep those questions coming.